Now, First Chronicles chapter 10, we're kind of getting away from the genealogies now in this section, this part of First Chronicles, and getting a little bit more into the stories. Not as much detail as we got in Samuel and Kings, but we're going to tell the story and some new details to those stories. So if you go back to Samuel and Kings, you'll remember we reference Chronicles several times in there because there's more information here in Chronicles than what we got in those other books. So in this one, so just to set the stage with this, okay, we're here in the time where David is not king, Saul is king. David is kind of the leader of the armies basically for Saul, because after he slew Goliath, they basically made David eventually a leader in the army. He led the people. The main area is, of course, they're still fighting with the Philistines, which if you go back to, I believe it's chapter 2 of First Chronicles, we learn that the Philistines come from Ham. They're descendants of Ham, the third son of Noah. So that's where they come in, basically. So now we're into that spot where David he was the leader, and then he has to go into hiding and things like that. So that's kind of that era that we're talking about. So if you want references, first and second, right at the end of First Samuel, beginning of Second Samuel is the time frame. So if you want to have those open, kind of reference back and forth to get more full of the story, that would be a great thing to do. So, okay, verse 1. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Saul and after his sons. And the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. Okay, just pause for a second. Remember, Saul and the Philistines were fighting. David had a small band of men that had followed him and had left. And so he was always trying to flee from Saul. And then they ended up fighting, basically. David went to the Philistines for a little bit to live there out of the reach of Saul. And then went off and up into the mountains and lived there with a little band of men that helped him out. So that's what's been happening here. This is one of the final battles of Saul and the Philistines, basically. And so Jonathan gets killed and everything else, and that really causes David a lot of consternation and things. And of course, now he is going to become king as well and deal with all that here pretty soon. So you can get more of that backstory and everything else at that time in end of First Samuel, right at the beginning of Second Samuel time frame. In fact, if I remember right, at this point, let me think, just off the top of my head, David he's not fleeing as much yet as he is actually he is either right about the time he's becoming the king of Judah. Judah adopts David, basically, even though Saul won't. Judah adopts David. He reigns there for a little bit, and then they get things sorted out, and then he becomes king of Israel in a few more years. So I think that took 7 years or something. So let's see, verse 3, and the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was wounded of the archers. So we learn Saul got hit by arrows, and he got taken down. Verse 4, then said Saul to his armor-bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. So Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise on the sword and died. So Saul died, his 3 sons, and all his house died together. So this is a big deal that happens. The king of Israel is now dead. David and Saul they didn't like each other a whole lot. Jonathan actually helped David to escape from his father Saul several times. And then there's great battle happens. Saul's like, I'm wounded. I'm not going to survive. If they come up to me, because he's the king, they capture the king, they torture the king, they do things to the king. And he's like, I don't want to have any of that. Kill me. And his armor bearer's like, I'm not willing to kill you. You're the king. And so Saul kills himself, and the armor bearer's like, well, they're gonna accuse me of not defending him, so so he kills himself too. And of course, David was devastated when he heard that Jonathan was dead, and even Saul was dead at this time. In verse 7, when all the men of Israel that were in the valley saw that, they fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, Then they forsook their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So the Philistines really marched in and really were successful in this battle. Verse 8, and it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. When they had stripped him, they took his head and his armor and sent into the land of the Philistines round about, to carry tidings unto their idols and to the people. And they put his armor in the house of their gods, and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. Dagon was one of the main gods of the Philistines. So they put the head of their enemy in there as a trophy to Dagon. Their god protected them and made them victorious over Saul, basically. Verse 11, when all Jabesh Gilead heard all that the Philistines had done to Saul, they arose, all the valiant men, and took away the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons, and brought them to Jabesh, and buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. So Saul died for his transgression, which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar in spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord. Therefore he slew him and turned the kingdom unto David, the son of Jesse. Now David, I think, was a part of that valiant man that went in and helped with that. He arranged that, was encouraging that. In fact, there is a man who, and this is told in the beginning of 2 Samuel, there was a man that he took the crown of Saul and he brought it to David and was like, I took the crown, I did this, and David killed the guy. Basically, he's like, well, you were a traitor to your king. He's still the king. Let's not, defile him and what he did for Israel. And so that guy died because he was, of course, trying to ingratiate himself with David, who would be the next king, basically. So there's a ton more to the stories. If you get into this end of Samuel, 1 Samuel, and beginning of 2 Samuel, you get more of this story is there. So let's jump over to chapter 11, the next chapter, to continue to learn more, kind of go through this history of Israel again.